It is my pleasure to introduce Protecting All Children Today's CEO, Jo Bryant. During her time in this role, Jo has been implementing a range of mechanisms to sustain effective, highly trained child witness support volunteers who support vulnerable children and young people through the daunting court process. Today, Jo will discuss targeted ways to attract, recruit, train and support volunteers who provide direct client service delivery to victims and witnesses of sexual assault and domestic violence. Welcome, Jo.
Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everybody, and thanks very much for joining us this morning. I'm hoping that we won't have too many technical issues. I'm playing a video in the middle of the presentation, so I appreciate your patience if we have any trouble linking between the PowerPoint and the video. Just by way of some history, in 1984 there was a high-profile case involving a 4-year-old child in a sexual matter who was required to give evidence as at a committal in open court where she was vigorously cross-examined by defence at the time. Kay McGrath, Channel 7 presenter, was the court reporter at the time, and the Juvenile Aid Bureau police officers and the child's parents and other people who were concerned about the way children were treated in the criminal justice system essentially got together and made a pact to improve the way children were treated as victims or witnesses to crime. That's how we became an organisation. We grew from there and became an incorporated association in May 1986. So we're just about to celebrate our 30th anniversary of supporting vulnerable children and young people, and to date we've supported over 17,500 children and young people, as well as all their families. Okay, our purpose is to enhance child protection by reducing the trauma experienced by children and young people aged between 3 and 17 years who are required to give evidence within criminal justice system as victims or witnesses to crime. Okay, PACT essentially has 3 distinct service areas: the Child Witness Support Program, which provides practical support to children and young people aged 3 to 17 years who are required to give evidence in criminal court matters. We provide referral pathways to therapy and other support services throughout Queensland, and one of the major areas of my role as the CEO is in child advocacy, where we provide evidence-based feedback to our key stakeholders to inform change and give the children we support a voice throughout the system. Okay, we're a not-for-profit community agency that receives recurrent funding through the Department of Justice and Attorney General through their Victims of Crime funding program. We also generate funds through donations and membership fees. We're unique in Australia. Other states have different service models, but most of them fall within a government agency like the Director of Public Prosecutions or their Department of Justice. The work of PACT is performed by 3 full-time and 2 part-time staff. We have 7 volunteer Board of Management members and approximately 105 child witness support volunteers throughout Queensland. And that's the area we're talking about obviously today. Okay, to obtain PACT services, there must be an impending criminal court case. The very vast majority of our referrals come from the Queensland Police Service at time of arrest, and that enables us to link families in to other support services such as counselling, etc. However, referrals can also be received from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and that's our safety net if police, neglect, if you like, to put in a referral. Also, people can self-refer, child safety officers, school counsellors, etc. And our referral form can be accessed on the PACT website. Just some stats for your information. In this past financial year, we have supported 1,576 children aged between 3 and 17 years. The average age of the children we support is 13 years. 68% of the children referred are female, and sadly around the same number are cases of a sexual nature. Cases in relation to assault seem to rise each year, and 23% of our client base are culturally diverse, with 15% represented from the ATSI community. We've had a 5% increase in referrals from the previous year. Okay, so our direct client support is provided by carefully selected and trained child witness support volunteers. Our volunteers are thoroughly screened and trained to be impartial, unbiased, and are all required to hold a current Working with Children blue card. They're court approved and accepted. Our volunteers conduct face-to-face visits to build rapport, provide information about the court process and prepare the child to give the best evidence possible. They accompany the child when they meet with the prosecutor and view their original police statement. We've found that say the offence has occurred when a child is 8, it can take up to 2 years before the matter goes through the court process, so they're now 10. We've found that when they view their original police statement, that's actually quite traumatic, so it's really good to have a volunteer sitting with them when they do that. Okay, just some information about our volunteers. They prepare the child witness for the court process. If appropriate, they visit the CCTV or courtroom prior to the court hearing. They support and reassure the child during their waiting time in the court building. They accompany the child whilst they give their evidence. They maintain appropriate contact with the child and their carers until the child has given evidence. And throughout that process, they liaise with a broad range of individuals, including community members, child safety officers, police officers, members of the judiciary, etc. And throughout that whole process, they remain impartial and do not discuss evidence. Okay, let's see if this is going to work.
Hi, my name is Keith Revell. I've been a PACT volunteer for about 4.5 years now.
Hi, I'm Mary and I've been a PACT volunteer for 10 years.
Hi, my name is Jill. I'm a volunteer with PACT. I have been a volunteer for 13 years.
Hi, my name's Jo Bryant. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of PACT. PACT is a not-for-profit community agency that was established in 1986 to provide support to children and young people who are required to give evidence within the criminal justice system. PACT is funded through a grant through the Victims of Crime Funding Program through the Department of Justice and Attorney General. The support provided to children and young people is provided by carefully selected and trained child witness support volunteers.
I've supported children, I think the last count was over 70 children over that 4.5 years. And I guess one of the reasons I wanted to get involved was really to be able to contribute back into the community.
It is a marvellous organisation and our aim is to provide children with knowledge, and knowledge is power, and we give them the best opportunity so they can produce the best evidence possible.
My region is Cairns, far north Queensland, so we have a lot of interest in children to look after.
PACT is a Queensland-based organisation at the moment. We are looking to expand into other areas as the demand is there.
With grandchildren of my own, I know that sometimes children can be put in vulnerable situations and need some support.
Why we do so well is because we are trained so well. There's more training in this job than I've ever had in any other job I've done over the years. So it's a well-respected organisation throughout Queensland, and we are the envy of many states. We hear that when we go to conferences, etc.
The feedback PACT consistently receives from families is that we couldn't have got through the process without PACT involvement. By the child knowing what to expect, who's involved, it makes the process so much easier.
Together we can make a difference.
Sometimes our children experience things we hope they'll never have to. PACT is a non-for-profit organisation that provides support for children going through the court system and their families.
I know I can't take away her pain, but it is rewarding to know that I can help her through a difficult and potentially frightening experience.
I don't know how we would have managed without PACT. Now it's over, my daughter and I can finally get back to rebuilding our lives.
PACT. Be part of something special. Volunteer today.
Okay, so the way we recruit volunteers, in our experience, the most suitable and successful child witness support volunteers are retirees with much life experience, time capacity and flexibility to accommodate the erratic court process. Therefore, we do newspaper and social media advertisements accordingly. We prepare media releases for geographic areas where volunteers are needed, and we target specific groups such as Zonta, Lions, View Club, National Seniors, Probus, where either our staff or volunteers go and present information to members about the role of PACT to try and gain interest in people becoming PACT volunteers. Okay, when people inquire about becoming a volunteer with PACT, they receive an information pack which contains much information about the role. There's a covering statement outlining the time requirements of this unique voluntary role, our PACT brochure and historical overview, our volunteer application form, our role description and duty statement, some statements from existing volunteers about the role. Applications received are shortlisted, we have panel interviews conducted and referee checks undertaken prior to an applicant being offered a place in the next scheduled volunteer induction training program. Okay. Our program for a training is intensive, 4-day program, where we talk about the Evidence Act and the criminal court processes. We discuss the role description and duty statement. There's a lot of work on values clarification and responses to media articles to try and gauge how a person may react to different situations, and that's quite confronting for people. We talk about the rights and responsibilities of our volunteers, the benefits and challenges of volunteering, the referral and allocation process. There are set presentations from police, prosecutions, defence, a judge, and they undertake a court visit, talk about the code of conduct and the boundaries and the protocols. We have very strict protocols in relation to volunteer operation, and all volunteers are required to submit case paperwork following a matter so that we can record the outcome of matters and how children are affected throughout the process. Okay. So our induction process, following the induction training, a post-training interview is conducted to confirm the trainee's continued interest or to discuss any issues raised during training. So we had a situation not so long ago where somebody during the training asked the question, what would happen if a volunteer broke down while a child was giving evidence? And rightly we kind of responded, well, if people are likely to be affected in that manner, it may not be the role for them. So at times people self-select out at this time as they realise it's not for them. It's not a role that they'd be comfortable performing. Newly recruited volunteers must have a blue card, as I said, and then they're allocated 2 to 3 joint cases with an experienced volunteer where they accompany that experienced volunteer to home visits, court visits, meetings with the prosecutor, etc., to view and observe the way they operate. As I said, all our volunteers receive the same training, so where we have to, we can move volunteers around if somebody's not available, but we do try wherever possible as rapport is built with the child and the family to keep that volunteer with that one family. Once a trainee's observed an experienced volunteer, then their practices are observed for 2 to 3 cases, and it's at their and their supervisor's advice that the person becomes a solo child witness support volunteer. We've also implemented a team leader structure throughout Queensland whereby experienced volunteers provide peer support to members of their team. So we have team leaders in most geographic areas, and in Brisbane, or the Greater Brisbane area, there are 5 team leaders to cover the volunteers in their teams. Sorry. Okay, just some ways that we provide ongoing debriefing and support to our volunteers. We have a range of different ways to do that. So they have access to 2 paid volunteer coordinators, one for Greater Brisbane and one for Regional Queensland, who have social work or community welfare training. As I mentioned, we have the team leader structure. We provide or send out regular statewide emails to, provide our volunteers with information about changes to criminal court matters, etc. The volunteers have total telephone access to all the staff. In Brisbane and in the regions, we conduct monthly team meetings where volunteers have the ability and opportunity to have case discussions, and this in turn, provides learning for their peers. We send out quarterly newsletters which have a lot of information to increase their knowledge, and every 2 years PAC's committed to providing in-service training for our volunteers. We've got our next training program coming up in September where we try and bring as many volunteers as available from the regions down to Brisbane. We hold that training in conjunction with our annual general meeting, and this year it's in conjunction with our 30th anniversary and official opening of our new premises. So it's going to be an exciting time for those 2 days. Those conferences provide a wealth of knowledge for our volunteers, not only providing information and opportunities to network with their peers, to learn the different challenges between Greater Brisbane and the regions, but they also get presentations from the Police Project Task Force Argos, police prosecutions, the Children's Court, etc. So that, there's a lot of opportunities for learning there, and a lot of interaction occurs, we continually get good feedback about that. They do have access to external counselling if they require it, and volunteers choose the number of cases they wish to support. It is totally up to them. They can refuse or return a case to PACT at any time if they're feeling overwhelmed or like they've got too many. And it's totally dependent on the person. Some people will carry a caseload of 20 cases, and others will feel comfortable having 5. So that's absolutely fine by us. We have implemented a number of ways to recognise the contribution of our volunteers. We provide case contribution payments to our volunteers to try and provide a contribution to out-of-pocket expenses. We acknowledge that it wouldn't cover all their expenses for some matters, but other matters it would. We provide medallions and trophies acknowledging the number of children supported. We have lapel pins identifying the years of service. Every year we award a Volunteer of the Year award, which provides life membership and a plaque and a gift. We submit nominations for appropriate community service awards, and a number of our volunteers have been recognised accordingly. We profile different volunteers in quarterly newsletters. We provide certificates of appreciation and letters from our Board of Management. We put up Facebook posts. We fund annual Christmas lunches, and as I mentioned, we have the 2-yearly in-service training conference where we pay to bring everybody to Brisbane. Okay, some benefits of the volunteer model. It's obviously cost-effective service delivery. There's no way PACT or the government could provide the level of support provided to those 1,576 children throughout the year without using a volunteer model. It also allows PACT staff or paid staff to focus on more strategic and proactive activities. It gives greater flexibility for a not-for-profit organisation. Interestingly, because when the volunteers contact the families, they're really surprised that it's a volunteer providing the support, and that they're there because they want to be there rather than they're paid to be there. The PACT volunteering role is very complex, though very rewarding, and our volunteers continually give us feedback that they feel like they have made a significant contribution and a difference to the lives of the children they support. We are about continual learning, so our volunteers have the opportunity to learn new skills and obtain knowledge, so it's a continual learning process, and our volunteers feel they remain active and engaged with paid staff and their community. Some of the benefits that we've found. Now, some of the challenges is at times there's a lack of respect from paid staff because the person is only a volunteer, and I'm not talking about PAC's paid staff, I'm talking about all our stakeholders. So sometimes prosecutors, police, etc., think, oh, I don't need to return that call because the person's just a volunteer. And on the flip side of that, volunteer expectations of paid staff tend to be higher. given that they're unpaid and giving of their time freely, their expectations are that we're paid to do a job, so we should be doing it, you know, to the highest standard. A complex or a challenge for PACT is managing unsuitable volunteers and their exit from the role. Volunteers sometimes feel that as they're volunteers, you know, the agency shouldn't be telling them what they can and can't do, or what they can and can't say. And given the nature of the work of PACT and the fact we work with child protection, police and members of the judiciary, we have to remain impartial and not say or do anything that could put that matter into question. Volunteers need to feel included in the organisation and its decision making, and we do that at PACT through paid membership. So at our annual general meetings, it's the members who are the volunteers and the board members who select the incoming board for the following year. There is a real need for clearly articulated role descriptions and duty statements, a comprehensive training program, and a signed code of conduct and operational protocols. That is so important when dealing with volunteers. And the ability to maintain clear boundaries for unpaid staff, especially working with vulnerable families. Children do build a rapport, and it's really important for our volunteers to educate families about their role, when that role will finish, and just maintaining you know, really good boundaries. Keeping people engaged if the voluntary role is not challenging enough, or if there's not enough work. You know, sometimes we'll have new volunteers come on board and we go through a stage where in their particular area we just haven't had the referral numbers to offer them work. Sometimes we'll lose people if there's not enough work. Volunteers can feel unappreciated. It's really important to work hard on making sure that they get the acknowledgement they deserve, because at PACT they're the backbone of our organisation. And obviously the financial implications of out-of-pocket expenses. So trying to make a contribution to that and making them feel like their efforts are rewarded and acknowledged. We also are very conscious of our insurance and making sure we have adequate insurance coverage for our unpaid workforce. Okay, so that is our presentation in a nutshell.
Okay, so as far as questions go, my camera's not working either. That's all right. I'm okay with people not seeing me. So I was really, so obviously your organisation is set up with the model that you work with, is set up to have a lot more capacity to work to the extent you do with volunteers. Not a lot of organisations will have the capacity to go through that huge amount of training and induction and to the level of processes that you do. If you could give, say, 3 things that are essential when choosing volunteers or working with volunteers that are going to be involved in complex client service delivery, what 3 things would they be for an organisation that is looking at doing that?
Thanks, Lauren. Obviously suitability to the role and making sure that whatever volunteer role you have, it's clearly defined and articulated, so people are aware of what is expected of them. So suitability to the role, clear role definition, and just continual check-in. So making sure that the volunteer is suitable, they're enjoying the work, they're getting something out of it, and as a result, you're increasing your client services by having the right people providing the support that's needed throughout the community.
Yeah, I do have another question there from someone in the audience, but I just wanted to follow up that kind of, as far as unsuitable volunteers go, I wouldn't mind hearing a bit more about how you work with those that are unsuitable. Do you have a 3 strike rate, or do you just basically say, are you clear from the beginning that, you know, we'll determine if you're not suitable and that'll be it, or?
Yeah, so one of the things we do, Lauren, which is really important, is on all our documentation that we send out to volunteers, we're clear that PACT has the right to whether or not to accept somebody to become a volunteer. We're also very clear, if we do not accept somebody for a volunteer that we have really strong reasons and documented reasons on why the person may not be suitable. And so I guess they're the main things, is to be clear that you have an out clause, if you like, if agencies are looking at putting on volunteers. And the other thing in relation to our work, as you know, people do not become fully fledged PAC volunteers until they've had their application assessed, they've been interviewed by a panel, referee checks have been done, they've obtained a blue card, they've attended training, they've observed a number of cases, and they've been observed from a number of cases. So it's actually quite a lengthy process in our organisation for somebody to be accepted. So there's quite a lot of opportunity along that track, if you like, for issues of concern to become evident and then addressed fairly quickly.
Okay, so for smaller organisations that don't have the capacity to have an interview panel and they don't have, you know, to do all those steps first, is there something? I think I remember you mentioning something about looking over some controversial articles.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. So as part of our training, the stuff we talk about, role specification and also values-based things. So in our training, one of the things that we do is we play quite a controversial case video where a defendant was wrongly accused. So it was just challenging people's views when you saw the other side of the situation. We also get volunteers to read a number of quite confronting newspaper articles, and through their values clarification get them to sort of stand, you know, in what quadrant of the room they address with. So there are ways like that sort of make us, or the flags will come up if we think somebody's, you know, got too strong of views in relation to any of these things, because our volunteers are taught never to talk negatively about the accused, you know, never to refer to him or her as the baddie. You know, obviously they're exposed to really horrible information about what the child's experienced, but they don't discuss it or talk about it, and they also don't have a vested interest in the outcome of the matter. Because a child pre-records their evidence prior to the trial, and that evidence is then played at the trial, our volunteers have completed their involvement before the matter goes to court and don't know the outcome of that matter, and that's a deliberate thing to maintain those boundaries I mentioned earlier. Okay. So for smaller organisations, it's just having the checks and balances in place and being upfront and articulating that it is the organisation's right to release a volunteer that they believe is unsuitable for the work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one from the audience. Do you source most of your volunteers from attending community meetings or events, or do they come to you?
Mostly through, advertising, attending community events, often through friends of friends, which is great. We do a lot of advertising. We do, you know, as I said, send out media releases. I often do radio interviews when we're recruiting in specific areas. But yeah, either the staff or volunteers will attend, you know, Zonta Lions, National Seniors, etc. meetings and try and attract suitable volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real mix, I guess, if you like.
Yep. As far as your training programs you mentioned earlier, are they closed just to your volunteers, or if there was, say, a domestic violence resource service that had a couple of volunteers they were looking at taking on, would they be able to attend your training for your volunteers as well?
Yeah, it is closed for our volunteers, and there's sort of reasons around that. One of the things that we've done a lot of work on is being court accepted. And so our volunteers are trained to provide the level of support to children and young people in that very highly complex and formal court process. Mm-hmm. So often, you know, families will come to DPP and say, look, I want grandma to sit in with my child while they give their evidence. And, you know, often the presiding judge will not accept that because grandma's not trained not to speak to the child, not not trained, and she has a vested interest. The other thing is we've found that with as the average age of the children we support is that teenage age, they don't actually want mum or grandma hearing, you know, what they've been through. So having an independent person is really important. So getting back to your question, we are happy to share any of our resources with anyone, but I guess PACT, just for longevity, has is well accepted and has expertise in relation to children giving evidence within the criminal justice system, and our training is very targeted to that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. So if it was a, say, for example, someone providing court support with DV workers to women generally, would that be more appropriate or still quite targeted to the children?
It would be. Yeah, it is very targeted to the children, and the court process for adults is, you know, fairly different. Because we've established vulnerable witness suites in most of the courthouses throughout Queensland, we kit them out with games and books and TVs and, you know, microwaves and fridges and things, because, you know, often families are there for the day waiting, and our volunteers are trained, you know, to keep the kids calm and you know, answer any questions, etc. And then when they go into the CCTV room, when their child's evidence, the children know that they're not allowed to talk to them once they're in that room. That video is linked straight into the court, and the judge can see the child obviously and the volunteer who is with them. So there's some really strict protocols around the way children are treated, and the Evidence Act, where we base all of our, you know, which is fundamental to the training that our volunteers receive, is actually, you know, the child's evidence. So whilst there would be probably some aspects of the training which would, you know, correlate across both the adult and child sector, some of it would be relevant to people working with adults, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there any specific kinds of training you would recommend for workers, for volunteers that are looking at being involved in organisations that deal with domestic and family violence?
I guess it's all about what the agencies are providing and what level of support. Needing consent from clients, we have to obtain consent from our clients to receive information about the court process. So those sort of aspects are really important. I guess it's about, Lauren, the appropriateness of the use of volunteers as well. In different settings. So I think it's a question for all agencies. Some areas it's not suitable to have, you know, volunteers operating, and you've just got to be mindful of that. I think one of the benefits of PACT is we sort of started as a volunteer organisation, and that's what it was from day one. I think it's often difficult if you have an organisation with paid staff and then you decide to outsource some of their work, if you like, to volunteers. So it's about being really clear what's appropriate work for a volunteer and what's not, and making sure that you have adequate training to support that.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from the audience at all? No. Did you go into the types of sort of backgrounds that you look for when you're recruiting volunteers? Did I miss that?
But yeah, it was there. When we get applications, we definitely look at a person's time capacity, their ability. PACT does get a lot of calls and a lot of inquiries from students who are wanting to get some experience working with children and young people. Unfortunately, we've found in the past that hasn't been effective for us. And one of the things that we really find with our volunteers, they tend to stay either a very short time or a very long time. And we have volunteers who have been with PACT for 15, 16 years. One volunteer in particular has supported over 700 children herself. So in relation to the types of people that we find suitable for us. That's why when we send out the information pack, we actually outline all of those things, because we can get a call on a Friday to say a matter's being heard on the following Monday or Tuesday. So where possible, our volunteers have to have the flexibility and capacity to rearrange their lives essentially so that they can be at court with the child that they've agreed to support. Mm-hmm. Having said that, as our volunteers receive the same training, if we need to swap volunteers around because somebody's away, etc., we do that. We just don't do it if we don't have to.
Okay.
So did I answer that question, Lauren?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So just in regards to the resources you mentioned that people can get hold of, would they do that through the website or?
Yeah, or they're welcome to contact me. I've got the contact information up on that slide now.
Yeah.
You know, we obviously have a lot of, you know, like codes of conduct and our protocols for volunteering that other agencies could adapt to the type of work that they're doing. We're welcome to share any of our resources that we've got, or even just to have a chat and tell people about our learnings. You know, I've been with PACT 11 years and things come up that I've never heard of before. It is a continual learning process, and the children we support are different. Every case is different. One other thing that I haven't mentioned, I think that's particularly important, is getting feedback from clients in relation to the performance of your volunteers and staff. So we actually survey, we have 3 ways of providing or obtaining that evidence-based feedback. Our volunteers will submit incident reports of their observations where the system has let down the child or family or been particularly fantastic with the child or family. So they lodge either positive or negative incident report, which are then provided to the key stakeholders. After a child's given evidence, the volunteers survey them and ask them, you know, 6 simple questions. How are your dealings with police, the prosecution, judge or magistrate, defence, giving evidence, and your overall court experience? And kids say a fair bit in that, and that provides them with a level of closure. So, you know, I'm really proud that we introduced that back in 2012. And the key stakeholders really love that information. And apart from that, it's quite hilarious to read, especially the comments about defence. You know, I've learned a lot of new words over the last few years. And the last part of the feedback we obtain is we have a social worker who telephones the families we support within a couple of months of the matter being finalised from our perspective, and they ask the questions about our volunteer performance. So it's also about making sure and learning from that feedback that we get from families, and that, you know, they raise lots of different issues, which are, you know, 90% of the feedback we receive is positive in relation to the operation of our volunteers. But yeah, I think that's another thing that's really important, is making sure that you have the feedback to back up and substantiate your funding if you're getting government funding from somewhere or funding from anywhere, really.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much, Jo. It's been really interesting. And if people have further questions that they think of later, they can email that email address. Is that right?
That's right.
Yep. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar today.